Live now.
Thank you. Members, before I begin with the normal information that I provide for the public and for yourselves, could I just ensure that all your microphones and officers are on mute? It stops the interference with the meeting.
Chairman, could I just point out I don't have chat. I do have a raised hand function, but not chat. So I will.
That's correct, Councillor Bradman. And we won't be using the chat function, so just a raise hand if you wish to make a comment. Thank you. So I will now move to the information I need to share for the benefit of the public. And I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and keep your microphone muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I may declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. I will begin by calling the names of all members of this committee to establish their presence. Please, could you unmute your microphones now and confirm that you can hear and we can hear you. Thank you. So starting with Councillor Bradnam.
Present.
Councillor Dupre.
Present.
Councillor Gardner.
Present. Apologies for lateness.
Councillor Gowing.
Present.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Gowing. Councillor Hudson.
Present, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Scott.
Yes, present. Morning.
Good morning. Councillor Shooter.
Present. Good morning.
Morning. And Councillor Wotherspoon.
Present.
Thank you. And myself. I did, just to confirm on that list as well, I did have Councillor Wilson, but just prior to the meeting, it was noted that the full council, a recent full council meeting, as a result of proportionality change, Councillor Wilson is now no longer a member of this committee. However, we will be looking to, I've just received confirmation that there will be an independent member joining the committee, but at the moment it is vacant. So we do have all members that are currently assigned to this committee present today. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item number 1. And sorry, before we do agenda item number 1, would the Democratic Service report any apologies for absence?
There has been no apologies received, Chairman.
Thank you. And again, we just note the change in membership, which has resulted in having one fewer members here today. So does we now move on to declaration of interest. Do any members wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interests in any of the items we're considering today? If you do, would you please use the raise hand function? Good. There's no declarations of interest. So I will move on. And we move on to agenda item number 2. And this is the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of October 2020. We are being asked to approve these minutes of the meeting on the 15th of October as a correct record. Can I ask any members who does not agree with this proposal to please use the raised hand function now? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, it's not a matter of accuracy. I agree with the minutes, but I just wanted to check, is the numbering to do with the numbering of actions? Because it starts at 35 and goes to, I think, 45. Is that the numbering of, as it were, actions taken?
I understand that's in the municipal year of number of items that the committee would have considered. So that's why it starts from that. But I'll seek clarity from the Democratic Services team just to check that.
Chairman, that's correct. It's from the start of the municipal year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have no further raised or no additional raised hands from members. So I will take that as the rest of members or all members are all happy for me to sign those minutes as a true record when I'm able to do so and able to get back into the offices, and I will do so. which moves on to the action log of that meeting and previous meetings. And just bear with me, I'm just trying to manage numerous pages. We move on to action number 32, which is the action around the Great Fens Tactical Plan. And we've got the comments there and the status complete. Any comments on that? Okay, then we move on to action 33 and the ongoing actions around Northstowe phase 3A and the comments we have been provided to members and circulated. And that's an ongoing action. Any further comments or questions? Then we move on to action 38, similarly linked to 33. And then 44, a completed action around the planning white paper. And lastly, 45. Then I have no comments from members. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bradnam, you raised your hand.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to check, where will those comments on the planning white paper go? It says they'll be signed off by the chairman, but then where will they go to? Do they go direct to the consultation, or do they go to full council? Or?
Yes, so they once they were confirmed, obviously the majority of those comments and the consultation response was given to or circulated with members at the meeting. With minor changes were delegated to myself or to the officers in conjunction with myself. Those minor changes and comments that were received at that meeting were incorporated in our response, and the response was sent to the department as part of their consultation.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre, I've noticed your microphone's off mute. Is that because you wanted to speak, or was that just a...
No, it's just an oversight.
No problem. I didn't want to miss you. Thank you. That's the action log complete and with no further comments. So therefore we move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 5. And this is the Swaffham Prior Community Heat Project investment case. And I will ask, we have here today, we've got Cheryl French, our Programme Director for the Climate Change and Energy Investment Unit, and Matthew Rathborne, who I believe is here to help answer any technical questions around the financial modelling of this project. So I will hand over to Cheryl and Matthew in one moment to take us through the report. Before I do, I've just noticed Councillor Bradnam, you've raised your hand again.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify, do you want to say for oral record that there were no petitions or public questions at item 4?
Thank you very much. That's incredibly diligent of you and correct. I should have done so. So there is no, sorry, I just got a note to say the meeting has been recorded. There is no, we've received no petitions or oral questions, but that's well worth noting. Thank you. So yes, I will move to, I believe, Cheryl, who will be taking us through the paper and report agenda item number 5. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. I'm going to take this opportunity to take you through a bit of a journey, and I know that all of you want to get to the point of asking questions in detail around the paper, but this is the culmination of 3 years' work with the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust, and there's been a lot of learning and discussion on the way to get to this point, so please bear with me. So this project is unique for many reasons. It's the first of its type in the UK. It's taken a rural village off oil and onto renewable energy using a district heating network. There is no upfront cost to households that want to join the scheme. And this is a major barrier for current incentives where you have to pay upfront to join. For this project, households that want to join do not have to pay an upfront fee as long as they join before we start construction. The project has also been designed for a rural village, which has got old listed homes and the quirks and nuances of owning and living in some of those homes means that the temperature that you need from a heating system is higher than you would conventionally require from an individual air source heat pump. So there's also been innovation into the design of this scheme. So what are the benefits? So what we will get out of this project when it's delivered is 1,250 tonnes of carbon emissions reduced every year. And over 30 years, between now and 2030, that's more than 37,000 tonnes of carbon emissions. That's playing a role in terms of carbon reductions to deliver our 2050 net zero carbon challenge. Along with that, there are 1 million homes in the UK, mainly in rural villages. So this is a rural challenge, more so than an urban challenge, that need to decarbonise between now and 2050 to come off oil and onto something which is renewable or which is not emitting carbon emissions. If this project progresses, you're going to be delivering a real live example of a village retrofit. This will help demystify some of the technologies and also provide support for investors who are looking to invest in the green economy and the green recovery, because there'll be a better understanding of what it takes to put together a project like this, where the risks are, and what over time those risks play out and look like. So this is also about building confidence in the green economy. It's also a project which is going to be a blueprint for other communities. All the information, all the modelling will be shared, all the templates are going to be shared. Government funding has been part of the development of the project. And as a result of that, we will be providing a document at the end of this process to just show and check the journey that we've had to go through to get here. And then I wanted to also just highlight that we've had discussions with the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Kwasi Kwarteng, who is very supportive of the project. We had these discussions back in November. There's strong support for this to be a national exemplar. And there was commitment to make this project work and for collaborations between his department and us to find a funding solution. But why is Swaffham Prior the first of this type of project? Why haven't projects been done or delivered of this type before? And I think it's quite easy to answer that from the project team. It's taken us 3 years to get to this point, and that's because it's been a big learning journey and the projects are complex. And they're not just complex in terms of technical, they're complex trying to bring forward new business cases that work for a low carbon future. And so I just wanted to quickly take us through a couple of those things to just sort of exemplify why this is a challenge. Before that, the team that has worked on this project has included finance, property, commercial, legal, engineering design, technical project management, community engagement, and experts from both internal and outside of the council working with the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust as representatives in the community. Getting that team of skills together and the knowledge across these wide range of disciplines to work on a solution, which isn't yet commonplace in the UK, does require commitment, resource and tenacity. And this type of project is beyond what a community can reasonably take on at risk. And there'll be other projects that come forward where that issue of what the community can take on and take forward at risk is a key challenge. So we need to be supporting our communities to come forward with projects and support the fact that when you are moving into a future of low carbon, that the pulling together some of those projects will take time and will take experts from a range of different disciplines. The technology that we're using isn't new. It's widely deployed in Scandinavia and Europe, but the technical challenges that have been applied into the UK context, an historic village with listed buildings, low density, and the real challenge is how those technologies interact. So how do you have air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar PV interacting with smart platforms for measuring and monitoring equipment? So the system that's been designed using air, ground and sun to heat homes and hot water to cut carbon emissions does require clever, inventive engineers, lots of energy data and modelling, and only through that process can you bring forward a robust customer-focused system. So there's a lot of intelligence, new skills, data analysis that are required. Just yesterday, we got the results through from some additional modelling, which is how we could potentially use electricity supplied from North Angle Solar Farm, green electricity, directly into the project. And we've been mapping how that electricity fits with how individual households use electricity during the day to support the heat. What this identified is that where we previously thought that a solar farm North Angle could provide 98% of the electricity directly, we find that it can only do less than that because of how human behaviour in the home impacts how you draw electricity down and how it's used and how that profiles and maps onto the generation of electricity from a solar farm. So what we've already found just yesterday, that we've got a £2.2 million impact over 60 years on electricity prices, just through how energy is used by individuals and how that means you draw energy down from, or electricity down from, a solar farm. This is going to negatively impact the social NPV on the project, but the commercial NPV still remains positive, which is very useful. And Matthew will highlight that as we go through the discussions. So there is a lot of learning as we go on this project and we move forward. And I think this will continue over the next 15, 20 years as we work through and deliver and support this project if it's approved. The other thing that's been really important to the project is been engaging and working with the community and getting buy-in. This has taken time and resilience from everybody, both the community in terms of wanting information from us ahead of us being able to give it to them, and us being able to give them information that is understandable, that is credible. So it's been important for us to build trust, provide explanation, share information and consult. We've covered heat supply agreements, tariff structures, planning applications, the implications of taking oil tanks out of homes, digging up roads for the heat network, why we should be trusting these technologies. Not everyone in the community is a pioneer. Some are naturally more cautious or just meeting and coming and being introduced into the climate change agenda and what it means to us all. But I think what we have shown over the last 3 years is consistency. We've been doing trust building with the Good Project to build hearts and minds support. More of that has to continue. And I think the emphasis here is that this is a long-term partnership that we will be creating with the community and committing into the community if we progress. We've had COVID-19 and Brexit happening just at a critical time of development of the project. This has added risks, costs, new ways of talking with communities and others, but importantly, it's also introduced reduced competition in the supply chain. There is supply chain instability as products from abroad or contracts have stopped, or for whatever reason, businesses are being challenged in how they are going to keep growing and moving forward. The green economy and the green recovery from the pandemic is going to require supply chain support and providing certainty through project investments to keep growing and thriving if we're going to move forward into this low carbon world. But the most challenging part of the project has been applying for and aligning grants, getting the income, getting the governance, working with the rules around funding and putting together the business case. By far, that has been the most difficult process. And I think the lesson that we've got to learn is that for future villages, future schemes, how are we going to be using the lessons here to create funding streams that make it much easier for the other million homes to be able to get more quickly and swifter to the point of getting schemes funded and supported. There is no clear funding pathway for projects, and there are infrastructure deficits in oil communities. So we are hoping that what we're doing and creating with this business model is pioneering, that it's going to provide the infrastructure that lasts for the community. Not having gas infrastructure means that you're always going to be looking at probably more expensive options for the community to deliver your heating and hot water. So, but this all comes with financial risk as set out in the paper, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So the investment case that we've put in front of you today is because the business case needs to secure a renewable heat incentive for the project. And this timescale is driving the decision that you at committee need to make. Without a decision, this will impact our eligibility to apply for renewable heat incentive. The renewable heat incentive closes on March the 21st and is a two-stage application process. Ordinarily, we would not bring an investment decision to you with this level of uncertainty, but COVID, Brexit and grant regimes are bringing exceptional times. So we have submitted already a stage 1 application for renewable heat incentive income, and we supplied that at the end of November when we got planning permission. We're now waiting to hear from Ofgem to invite us to submit a stage 2 application. As part of that process, we have 3 weeks to submit and demonstrate financial close. We are unsure when we will hear from Ofgem. Obviously, we submitted back in November. I think there's a backlog. There's been changes in terms of pot allocations. So we could hear any day now, or it could be 3 or 4 weeks. We just don't know. So we have been preparing to get to the point of taking asking you for an investment decision so that we can be ready to apply and eligible to apply when the time comes. If we delayed this investment decision until March committee, this would put the project at risk of not being able to apply and secure the RHI income, which is why we've come to you while there has still been some uncertainties in the project. I think that's probably it for the moment, apart from to say this report is seeking an in-principle investment decision from you at committee. This will facilitate the stage 2 application for renewable incentive, but we recognise that there are uncertainties in the project, and recommendation E is to manage that process, that there are some uncertainties that need to be tied down, like the grant from government, the Heat Network Investment Project government, like the RHI that we'll be looking to secure from government, and just the final costs now that we have certainty on Brexit. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, so yes, yeah. That's me finished. Unless Matthew wants to add anything.
Thank you, Cheryl, and Matthew. Absolutely, feel free to make any comments that you believe would be helpful, and then we'll move to members for questions.
I don't think there was anything to add to that comprehensive run through the enjoyable last 3 years.
Thank you very much, and thank you for attending, Matthew, because I know that you know the technical aspects of the financial modelling are complex, to say the least, and so it'd be really helpful to have your mind here to help answer those questions. So thank you, members. This is something that we've visited a number of times in a number of different forums. This scheme, and here we are at the next step. So I'm sure there probably will be some questions on Cheryl's report and the details behind it. So if you could use the normal raise hand function, and I'll hopefully take those questions and put them to the officers. Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much. Can I just confirm you are just taking questions only at this stage, and that you will come back to us for comments once you have taken the questions?
Yes, please. If I could just take questions, and then we'll enter into sort of debate and comment afterwards. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a number of questions then that I would like to ask. The first one is on recommendation E, which ends by saying that the decision to sign contracts is to be delegated and taken by officers in consultation with the chair of an Environment and Sustainability Committee and Green Investment Advisory Group. Does that mean the whole of the Green Investment Advisory Group, or just the chair thereof? I would rather like it to be the whole of the group, because I think that we have developed some understanding over time, thanks to the officers' diligent and detailed presentations of financing behind this scheme. And I think having made that investment, it would be useful to draw on it and getting the sign off by the whole of that group rather than us, the chair of that group. So my question is that the intention? The wording wasn't clear. My second question is that on page 15 of the agenda bundle, which is 2.4.1, the assumption is made that there will be the extra £1 million in HNIP grant funding that we are seeking. I'd like to explore what gives officers that level of certainty that they can build that into the assumptions stage. That is quite an assumption. I would also like briefly to talk about 4.5 on page 16 and the LIR borrowing rate of 1.39%, which change up to the point at which that loan is actually taken out.
Chairman, I can't hear. I don't know if other people are having the same problem with Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Yes, Councillor Dupre.
Councillor, just
Councillor Bradnam. Councillor Dupre. Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. That's great. Councillor Dupre, you're breaking up a little bit. It was sort of very audible to start with, but was slowly getting worse. I don't know whether you can. It does sound almost like that you're. It's the connection with your microphone as opposed to a signal problem. So I don't know if that's just a little bit loose or something. Or so if you don't mind having a look at it, just while you're trying to address those issues, if I may start by just answering your first question, which, if I may, which is around the advisory group or the chairman. It was my intention when I spoke with Cheryl that would be an advisory group decision, so the whole group would come back to revisit, not just the chairman. I think that's really important. I'll let you carry on, and then Cheryl will take your other questions. Hopefully we'll be able to hear you a little better.
Thank you. In case it is the microphone connection, I've resorted to the headphones, which should clear that up. So sorry, my second question then was about what gives officers the certainty that they will that we will be successful in obtaining the additional £1 million in HNIP funding, which is on page 15 at 2.4.1. I would to talk a little bit of the 9%, which we are told is not nailed down until the loan is actually taken out, and what the variables are about that, and the likelihood of what that rate might be at the time at which the loan is taken out. The next question is about 2.4.6, spanning pages 16 and 17. And there's a note there that the council will provide the finance for the remaining cost of the SPV, but the exact details will depend on the rules that replace the state aid requirements. What sort of details is it that are uncertain at this time? What kind of details are we awaiting? Next question is the 2.4.8 heat sales to customers, and it says if approved, the SPCHP will look for these homes to connect to the network. What does look for mean? Is that something that can be conditioned under planning? Who has the authority, the power in this situation? Who can say yes or no? What does look for exactly mean, and what influence do we have in that? 3.4.3 on page 19, in the table 2, there's a heading of September 2020, which I assume is September 2021, if the dates are sequential. Could you confirm that? And finally, on my questions, the paragraph 5.1, significant implications, says
that it is also important to note that the rural estate land for the energy centre is integral to the Swaffham Prior project business case. And the rural estates team have also supported the project development. Yes, that's obviously the case, but one of the things that we have been told throughout this project is that this is, and indeed, Cheryl mentioned it in her introduction, that the aim is to use this as an exemplar for future projects, which is wonderful and something I fully support. But if the rural estate land is integral to the business case, what is the prospect for us being able to have this exemplar project rolled out to other villages where we may not have the fortunate congruity of having a suitable piece of rural estates land for the energy centre next to the houses in question? That's been a fortunate happenstance with this particular scheme. What happens elsewhere where that doesn't apply? And that's my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I will also take questions from Councillor Hudson now, and we'll try and answer them, because quite often the questions are so interlinked with this project that it may be better to take all of the questions and ask Cheryl and Matthew to respond once we've received them. So, Councillor Hudson.
Chair, I've got lots to say on this, but I can say that later. This is a very quick question. It's certainly not a speech. I'd just like to ask, please, where are the exit points? What are the exit points we have in this project, and under what circumstances can we use them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a really helpful question. I've got no other indication from questions from members at the minute, so I'll ask Cheryl and Matthew to answer those questions from Councillor Dupre and Hudson. And obviously, if there's any more that arise, we can take those in due course. So thank you, Cheryl.
Okay, so Matthew, I'm just going to clear up a couple quickly. So Councillor Dupre, you mentioned on table 2, September 2020, it should be September 21. So that one's done. Matthew, I was wondering if you could just quickly take the 2.4.5 and the interest rate and tying that down. And then I'll take the HNIP grant.
So that's in terms of the HNIP certainty, the grant certainty.
Well, that's, yeah, you could take HNIP grant certainty and the 1.3.9% that Councillor Dupre was challenging.
In terms of the grant amount, we've been in discussion with First Base and then HNIP for the best part of 3 years now, I think. And the grants that Cheryl talked to before, which were specifically aimed at the development of the project, all those were supported by business cases. In those business cases, we had been talking about the need for a capital grant of around £3 million. Originally, we thought that was going to be through some sort of a special scheme run by Base, but we were then steered to HNIP as the appropriate route to get capital funding. That caused a problem for the scheme in that the interaction between the renewable heat initiative funding and the capital grant meant we could only claim part of the costs of the entire project, those costs linked to the heat network rather than the energy generation itself. So the grant award that we eventually got offered by HNIP was 1.7 million rather than the 3 million that we were originally asking for. And the reason it was 1.7 was that was the maximum 50% of the eligible costs. Now, one of the reasons why we've gone back to ask for extra grant is the cost increases that have come through, and Cheryl's talked about some of the reasons, COVID, Brexit and so on. Because there have been cost increases, we are now able to apply for more grant than we were before. So there are some slight grey areas about eligibility, and therefore, I'm not putting my hand on my heart and saying, yes, we will get all the extra grant that we've asked for, but I would be surprised if we don't get a large majority of it, and I would be surprised if we're turned down entirely. And we're quite some way into the discussions that we've been having with HNIP now. We've gone through 2 or 3 iterations. We've shown them the modelling we've worked on. One important factor is that when we first started those discussions, HNIP said they had no process that could allow them to pay extra grant to current applicants. So in order to get extra, we'd have had to withdraw the application and put in a new one, and there would have been a big risk associated with that. As a result of ours and other projects in the same sort of position, in treaties to them, they have now put in place a process to give additional grant to applicants. So yeah, can't guarantee it, but I am pretty confident that we will get some grant out of that. In terms of the IRR, I wasn't 100% sure. The discussion seemed to be the conversation seemed to break up a little bit there, Lorna. But I think what you're asking was, what is the potential for that rate to change? And we won't get that rate locked in until we do sign a contract with Bouygues. That rate is driven by the money market rates for interest rates. So it's the values at which government sells its own debt, which ultimately determine the Public Works Loan Board rate. Those values do change from time to time. So it is entirely possible that the rate will vary. Whether that's up or down, I don't know. Most of the time, rates are relatively minor in the variations, but when you get a big shock like announcement of Brexit, that sort of thing, it is conceivable there could be a big change. All we can say is, well, if there were a big change, we would have to review the impact on the financial model, and if that is a major impact, we might need to come back to committee to discuss. But there's no current reason to think that there will be any major change in that. Was that everything you wanted me to respond to, Cheryl?
For the moment, yes, I'll pick up the state aid. So the point on 2.4.6, which was the heat network improvement project, which we've applied for grants, as Matthew's described. We can only apply for grant for the heat network under state aid rules, which were pre-Brexit, because we were also getting renewable heat incentive for the energy centre. So we had this split in the project that the energy centre was getting renewable heat incentive, so it's getting government finance. So to support the heat network, they ask for a special purpose vehicle to be set up, and you can have certain state aid exemptions under which you can provide that finance into that project up to a maximum of 50%. Now, our legal advice from Sharp Pritchard is that the state aid rules have changed as of the 1st of January, but I think there is still lawyers and guidance are still getting up to speed on what that means in terms of the implications for projects. So certainly, as part of the work that we're currently doing, we will be looking to get a further steer from our lawyers on what that means. Is there greater flexibility, as an example? So the whole project has to fit within those state aid exemptions that we've been working on. Does that help?
That does on that one, yes, thank
Yeah.
you. But
Okay.
I wasn't quite sure what details meant, which is what I was asking for. The
Okay.
details of how this will be done.
Oh, okay. So yes, so we're going to be talking. Sharp Pritchard, who are the advisors on the project, are looking at that and supporting our HNIP application and our state aid statement that we have to provide with our application. So they will be doing that. And we'll come back to and give you that information as part of the Green Investment Advisory Group if there's any issues.
Thank you.
The next one was 2.4.8, which was the heat sales. And so what we included in here was that just recently into the village, there's been an application for 28 new homes. And obviously those homes, you would want to look to have connecting into a network, which is a low carbon network, rather than installing something which might not be, carbon positive. So in discussion with the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust, they are submitting, first of all, a response to the application into the village, and requesting whether there could be conditions put forward onto the planning application that the scheme is connected into the district heating network. So obviously the policy position sits with East Cambridgeshire District Council. On a separate note, the technical project manager in Avico is contacting the developers on that project to start dialogue and share with them our scheme. So I'm hoping that between those two processes that we'll come to a position that it's a positive investment into the project, and they'll connect into the scheme.
Thank you, Cheryl. Chair, before Cheryl answers my last question about the other oil-dependent villages, can I just ask for clarification on the answer she's just given? You're talking about a 28 property scheme, I think, there, which is quite substantial. Would you take the same approach to, say, an infill development if someone had a back garden development of an additional property? Would you also be looking to have the odd infill single or two properties, for example? Would you also be looking to have those connected into the network?
Is that you want me to answer it? Absolutely. Everybody that is coming in with a new development, we would be looking to connect into that scheme.
Okay, thanks.
So I did 3.4.3, and then your next one was 3.4.4. Was that 3.4.4?
Was it? What was 3. Sorry,
could someone just refresh what was it? Was the prospect of other villages, wasn't it? And having land close to the village. You're right. Happenstance for Swaffham Prior was that Cambridgeshire County Council had land close to the village, which could help facilitate an energy centre, but not all projects are going to be in that position, or developments will be in that position. There is going to be, obviously, when you look at new projects, what is available in the local area. So, for example, there is a project happening in Huntingdonshire, which is in its early development phase, involving 3 villages, which Councillor Gardner is very aware of, where there are 3 villages which are approximately 800 homes off gas. You've got Grafham Water quite close by. So you've got Anglia Water potential to be involved with land and with a water reservoir. And you've also got potential to try and look at a different type of scheme. You might want to do a collaboration with businesses, or you might want to see if parish councils have got land that you could host energy centres on, or you might have to find different land assets to help facilitate that. So all projects won't be exactly the same. But I think there are always solutions that you can try and look for and find. It'll just be a different solution.
Thank you, Cheryl. If I could just say on that last point that Councillor Dupre highlighted that was under the significant implications, the need for the rural estates land. I think it's fair to say that a significant implication of any a similar heat network project will be dependent on the land, as you've highlighted. That if we can't access the land at a reasonable price or in the right location, then the project wouldn't be able to sort of start as such. We do need the land is imperative for something like a ground source heat pump heat network. Thank you.
Josh, there's the last question, which was from Councillor Hudson on the exit points.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I've got some other questions coming in, but yes, if you don't mind answering Councillor Hudson's question first. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes, so Councillor Hudson, the key exit point is whether we go into a contract with weeks for a design and build contract. So we're expecting the finalisation of costs by the first week in February, which will hopefully have settled down after Brexit and will give us certainty around what the costs are going to look like. We will have had a view from HNIP, which is the grant, and whether our application is eligible and that it will go through their processes successfully. And then when we've got the stage 2 application invite, the submission of our stage 2 application, we would not expect that to be problematic if we get to that phase and can demonstrate financial close. So your exit point is whether those 3 opportunities are tied down and fit within the financial criteria that we've set out and discussed in the paper. Now, one thing I just did want to quickly highlight is that obviously there is still some machinations around, you know, the modelling and households that are coming into this. So just yesterday we had that position on the energy modelling, which impacted the NPV. And so we now have a position that we've got a slightly different NPV than what you've got in the paper there. And I just wanted Matthew to just quickly explain what that is. Matthew?
Thanks, Cheryl. So as Cheryl explained, the reason for the change is that we had previously assumed that virtually all the electricity required to run the project, particularly the heat pumps, but the rest of the controls and so on in the energy centre as well, would come from North Angle Solar Farm, and that would be supplied at wholesale prices rather than having to purchase commercially at retail prices. However, the more detailed energy modelling, as Cheryl explained, the difficulty of matching up the timing of when energy is required with the generation from North Angle. The assumption now is that about 1/3 of the total electricity required will have to come from commercial sources at a much higher price, and that makes a difference of a bit over £2 million to the net present value overall. In the committee paper, it shows the net present value as being a positive figure of about 1 million. So we'd have a negative figure of a bit over 1 million negative as a replacement just from the electricity changes. There were also other figures coming through. Cheryl said we're not in the position yet of having cost certainty. We got a refresh yesterday of where the capital prices are looking based on the tendering exercise that we are running at the moment. That also showed slightly higher costs than we had before. So in comparison with the position in the paper, what would have been previously a positive 1 million net present value is showing up as a negative minus 1.7 million in the model that I did yesterday. The point that Cheryl briefly covered in the introduction, however, was that calculation of the net present value was using the discount rate that the government published for social projects. And the reason we thought that was appropriate in this case is that the rationale for putting the project to this committee in the first place was that it's not primarily a commercial project. It was seen as a service to residents and a way for the council to achieve its net zero obligations in future. However, if we were doing this financial planning just for committee, I would have done it using the commercial discount rate, i.e. that's the rate determined by the Public Works Loan Board, because that would be matching up the amount we pay in interest with the discount rate. So that's the way we normally do projects. That's all the other energy projects in the past have used that commercial discount rate. The reason I didn't put it forward in this case is that we're using the same model to inform the discussions with HNIP and BASE about government funding, and the outcome of the model is to show a lower net present value with the higher social discount rate than the commercial discount rate. At the time I put the original paper together, that seemed appropriate because the figures were coming out with a slightly positive NPV. That looked like a good picture to show government to say, yes, the project is viable, but we're not making too much money out of this because we said we wouldn't, because it's not a commercial project. Therefore, please give us the grant we asked for. If we're showing a more positive net present value, there's potentially the danger that they say, well, you don't need so much grant then. So at the time I put the figures together, that looked like a good idea. Today, that looks like less of a good idea because we're now showing a negative NPV on the basis that the papers were originally produced. What I'm trying to get across, probably very long-winded and cumbersome way though, is that that's just a matter of how you're looking at it. The actual underlying finances haven't changed. So the difference between the commercial discount rate and the social discount rate, that doesn't make any difference at all to the actual cash that comes in. It's purely a view you take as to how much value you ascribe to that cash coming in 10, 20, 30, and so on years' time. So the underlying project, I would say, is still a good one, but what I would suggest is that from this point forward, the financial modelling we produce for this project will use that commercial discount rate as we've done, as we will do with all the other energy projects, rather than the social discount rate, which we have just used for the purposes of talking to government. So when, if the future view of someone who is taking a delegated decision, that view would be based on the financial position of the project using the commercial discount rate. And that would be, under the current model, today's model, about a positive 1.5 million amount. So when someone looks at that in a month or two's time and says, are we entitled to go into contract with Bouygues because the finances of this scheme are equivalent, broadly equivalent to those which committee signed off in principle, the figure that they will be looking for will be that positive 1.5 million. Is it in that same sort of region?
Thank you, Matthew. That's really helpful. If I can, I've just noticed we've got a list of other questions coming in, but I noticed, Councillor Dupre, your question came in, and I know you've asked some more, so I presume it was on that last point that Matthew just raised. If it is, then I will bring you sort of to the front of the list just so that we can keep it on track as such.
It is, thank you.
Great.
I just wanted clarification from Matthew, because I hope I'm not misunderstanding him, but it sounded rather as if we would be telling government we were doing one thing and then actually doing another. And I just wanted clarification that we are playing with a straight bat with government, as it were, and not in some way trying to get this under the wire by telling them one thing but doing something else.
I am happy we're playing with a straight bat, yes, but I do understand the question. I do understand that it's a little bit of a grey area. It comes back to what I was saying in that rambling explanation, that the actual finances of the project have not changed at all. So the underlying cash values don't change. It's simply the value you associate with those. Now, I don't think it's unreasonable for government to take its own view of those values, because the social discount rate, that is a government rate. It's not something that we've invented. That's what they use for their own project methodology when they're evaluating schemes. One reason that they use that is that they don't borrow money. Now, their project evaluation doesn't take into account costs of borrowing at all. So when we put our schemes forward, one of the difficulties we have, and one of the reasons why the model that you've seen is so complex, is that it has to cope with being looked at in very different ways. So government discount entirely any loan interest when they say, does this project make sense? So for them, the social discount rate actually makes an awful lot of sense because they don't have loan interest in there in the first place. For us, loan interest is a crucial part of the project, and therefore it makes sense for us to use a discount rate that's linked into that. So I don't think we're being underhanded. And in fact, it is the same model. So both those discount rates are stated in the model, and you can change it by switching a sensitivity figure in the model. So I don't think it's that we're trying to hide things, but you're right that I am trying, if you like, or I was trying to emphasize the slightly different way that government looks at things and we look at things in order to try and make things look slightly better when we're presenting something to government. And I don't apologize for that. It's just like you're writing a CV or whatever, you put the best gloss on what we're trying to do. But in this particular case, because of that change in figures between writing the committee report and coming to committee, that has created a difficulty and uncertainty. That's why I wanted just to try and make sure that that was clarified, so everyone is clear what we are signing off on when the delegated approval is due to be made.
Thank you, Matthew. And dare I say, there'll be a lot more certainty to present government with figures if they were to commit to some of the funding packages. So hopefully it will serve its purpose, and then we'll be able to give more certainty around the costings. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions, please. One, and it's related to the last point. The first one is related to the last point. So is there any risk that if we change to the commercial basis, we would jeopardise the HNIP funding? And the second one is a more general point. And I remember when we had the briefing, we were advised that this project hung on the value of the carbon credits. And I wondered to what degree this project is dependent on our decision at item 7 of this agenda, which is instigating a decarbonisation fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Perhaps Matthew wants us to take the first question as it's linked to the previous comments. And Cheryl, you can perhaps take the second point around the decarbonisation fund and the link. Perhaps more the opportunity as opposed to its dependency, but I'll let Matthew take the first question.
Yeah, so in terms of the HNIP view, no, there's no risk at all that changing the discount rate would risk the HNIP funding. They go through a process of evaluating the finances of projects. And in fact, the risk would be if we show the finances as being too bad, because one of the criteria of the availability of funding is that if your internal rate of return is less than 0, they are not allowed to fund. So they take the view that if the project is a dead duck, then they shouldn't be pouring money into it. But we are nowhere near that. Under whatever discount rate you want, we're still significantly above that level. And switching between the commercial and social discount rate, there's a potential view, as I talked about the perception, but there is no risk at all that we would be risking the level of funding.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And then Cheryl, do you want to touch on the potential opportunity and or dependency on us having a decarbonisation fund, and more generally about the carbon credits and how much they impact on the project's viability?
Yes, so the business model has identified there's in all projects bringing forward oil-based schemes, there's an infrastructure deficit. So there is a high capital cost to be able to shift rural communities off gas because you have to put in significant levels of infrastructure. So moving forward, and I'll come back in a minute, moving forward, one of the discussions that we had with Secretary of State Kwasi Kwarteng was that we need to have, for off-gas rural communities wanting to decarbonise, a fund which is a capital fund, which basically bridges the gap of the additional cost all these communities face compared to what I call on-gas communities. So there is this gap of funding. What we've looked to do is, by aligning renewable heat incentive and grant, we are getting to a business case that nearly stacks up, but doesn't quite stack up unless we can sell the carbon emissions reductions at a certain level to businesses who are looking to decarbonise or have made pledges, voluntary pledges to decarbonise. Now, the risk of that in the project is that we don't know what's going to happen in terms of carbon policy moving forward. So if government chooses to bring in carbon policy, we will need to have discussions and influence that to make sure that this slice of income that we need to support the project can continue and is still viable. But that is a risk. So the work that the Cuspy researchers are doing, without sort of introducing their work before they're coming, is they've looked at what a decarbonisation fund could look like for Cambridgeshire on a voluntary basis, working and collaborating with businesses, because to deliver the 2050 targets, we need to speed up and deliver carbon reductions in the next 10 years. To change that investment level is going to require more than local authorities can invest. So we're going to require businesses to start looking at what they can do and supporting the local community to make these business models stack up. And so the report coming later just gives us a route through to have those wider discussions with governments and with, you know, the results that are going to be coming out from the Climate Commission work that's just happening, to say, well, what is the best level and how do we do this? So, does that help?
Yes. So the this decision is not dependent on it, but it gives us an opportunity to make this project easier to deliver.
So there is a dependency on getting money in for the carbon reductions that are generated as a result of this project.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl and Councillor Bradnam. Just to clarify, so yes, the sort of three legs of the stool that makes a project stack up and stand up is dependent on income, both from householders, you know, and their energy bills, and the carbon credit selling. That's an important part. The dependency on the decarbonisation fund is not entirely linked, in the sense of that we could still sell carbon credits along the route that we originally anticipated. However, what the report obviously has identified is that we could do that in a much more whole scale and easier way if the carbon fund were to be supported. So thank you very much.
So, sorry, my understanding is that would ensure that those carbon credits were used in our area, in Cambridgeshire.
Yes, I think that's
it would benefit us as Cambridgeshire, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm mindful, I don't want to get straight into the decarbonisation fund, but I think that question around how that fund will be managed and used locally is covered by the researchers, and they'll touch on that. So moving on to our last couple of questions, I am mindful of time. This is a huge item, so I make no apology for the time it's taken for us to talk through, but we do need to move forward. So Councillor Gardner, followed by Councillor Shooter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's just one quick question, really, with regard to 2.48 heat sales. The business case forecast that you're going to have 300 homes and businesses connected within 5 years. So I assume if we don't reach that, that makes the business case less viable. But also, can you tell me, with regard to the grants, if we don't achieve that, will that have any effect on the grants that we're liable to get from the government now and going forward? you know, if we don't actually achieve that figure that we're stating. Thank you, Chairman.
So it won't impact the heat network improvement grant, but it does impact the renewable heat incentive income stream. Because if the system produces or the demand for heat is less because less homes are in the scheme, then you draw down less income from tariff guarantee from the RHI. So there is a relationship between the number of customers in the scheme and the scale of the income that we can get through on the renewable heat incentive.
Thank you very much. Councillor, did you have a subsequent question, Councillor Gardner, or did that cover it?
That covers it. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Great. Councillor Shooter.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Cheryl, it's questions that may have been answered, but in the presentation that unfortunately I couldn't attend a few days ago. But is there provision, either virtually or actually, for some sort of visitor centre on this? Because if it does go ahead, as has already been stated, this is pretty unique, and I would think there'd be quite a lot of interest, certainly nationally, where people might want to either virtually visit the project or in actuality visit the project. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of provision there. In respect of the guarantees that will be given, I'm assuming there'll be insurance-backed guarantees, and has any research been done as to where those can be obtained and for what length of time they can be obtained over? And the final thing with regard to future projects, I'm wondering whether it might be worth putting this to government, that in your discussions with Kwasi Kwarteng, that incentives might be found for landowners to give up land for these sort of centres through the agricultural grant schemes. There's a lot of talk going on with agriculture at the moment about land being rewilded, land being used as incentives, and this would seem to me should be added to the list to enable farmers to give up a small portion of their land for this, and also a quid pro quo for that farmer in that he could take off energy for the various things that he might need, and that would enable it not just to be viable if the council owned the land nearby, but any farmer could enter into an agreement.
Thank you, Councillor Shooter. And before Cheryl answers those questions, can I just say on the second point around the agricultural bill and the land usage, I think that's an absolutely fantastic suggestion, and I certainly would take it up, that we'll perhaps write to the Minister to explain how that might be an opportunity, because as we noted earlier from Councillor Dupre's question, land is a significant implication in any of this. So if there's a way to make that more appealing, then fantastic. And I think that's a really good suggestion. Cheryl, did you want to take the first point that Councillor Shooter raised?
Yeah, so the planning application included the opportunity to put a small visitor centre by the energy centre, which is on Goodwin Farm. So there's planning permission, but what we haven't yet got is we're looking at it as a phase 2, where we would look to draw down grants to be able to facilitate that part of the scheme, rather than having sort of the full cost of that being put together for the residents and the bills that would be charged to the residents. So it's going to be a bolt-on. Matthew, that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which was around insurances, Chris Parkin in my team is talking to, I'm just trying to remember his name, is talking to our insurance manager around what are the insurances that we're going to require for the scheme. I don't have the detail of that, but I can share that detail with you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. If we can circulate those details to all members, I think it'd be really helpful to understand those. Thank you. I have no other questions from members, so I'm now mindful to move into the debate and or recommendations. I think the nature of the questions, and as I said at the start of this item, we have looked at this numerous times, and also the officers have been very transparent in the risks associated with this project. I think we've touched on a lot of those in the questioning. However, before we move to the debate and or recommendations, as a result of the questions that we've just had and the details being provided by Matthew and Cheryl, I would like to recommend a small alteration to the recommendations, particularly, actually uniquely only at recommendation E and the sign-off process. And this hopefully is designed to give members of the committee a little bit more reassurance than what that recommendation already does. And my suggestion to change the recommendation is to add in a few words, recommendation E for those that want to follow, after the words grants, so that's maintain the Swaffham Prior Community Project once final costs, grants, after that word, insert in brackets, and a positive NPV, close brackets, are confirmed. So that recommendation is basically to ensure that we're not signing almost, and I'm sure this isn't perhaps not the correct phrase, but a blank check to go ahead with this project, even with those caveated delegations. So this is basically saying that, you know, if we were to find ourselves in a negative NPV position, then the decision would have to come back to this committee for your consideration. So I hope you understand that slight change in that recommendation E that I'm proposing. And I will now move to debate and or comments from members on the report and the recommendations. And first I have Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I say what I was going to say, I just wanted to say something about that proposed alteration. I can understand why you're proposing that. The conversation that we had earlier, the answer we got back from Matthew was very much exemplified the old joke about asking an accountant what's 2 + 2 and the answer being what do you want it to be. But he did talk there about the implications and possibly moving to a negative NPV. But as we also have had explained, a lot of this is down to how it's presented. My concern, and I'm happy to have that come back to committee if members need reassurance, and obviously if you propose that you'll do it anyway, whatever I say. But my question really is just to seek reassurance from officers that doesn't in any way negatively impact the timetable for this or put any roadblocks that could actually prevent us securing the outcome which I hope we all want, which is for this project to go ahead. And on that note, what I was going to say was that I do fully support this project. I think it is genuinely exciting, and that excitement has been conveyed in the presentations today from the officers about it. I think I'm very enthusiastic about it. I think it has a huge amount to offer. It's genuinely community driven, and I just love to see that, the fact that it originated from the local community to address a number of issues, not just decarbonisation, but also the whole fuel poverty agenda as well. And I think that's fantastic. We've been very fortunate indeed to have the officer team that we have working on this, not only for their enthusiasm, but for their absolute dedication and their ability to scramble to meet a whole lot of uncertainties, a whole lot of changes which we've had described to us today, and the way that they have met all of that has been really very impressive. This isn't a project in which we're investing in order to get a profit. It's not an investment for yield. It is very much an investment in pursuit and support of our policy objectives around decarbonisation. And if we mean what we say about zero carbon, carbon neutral, all the rest of it, then we have got to get serious about putting money into this. And this is an absolutely classic example of starting something which I think is really innovative and transformational and will really work. And I'm very, very much in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dupre. I'll pass over to Cheryl in a minute to answer the question about whether my recommendation or recommended change in words has any significant impacts on, the project per se and the discussions with government. But just to echo, and I think your word to scramble through the way that the officers have is very accurate in some regards. It feels like that sometimes it's been a one-player rugby team versus 13 others trying to get across a pitch of being tackled at every level. But the resilience is incredible, and this is just an indication of how much that they put into this, that we've got to this stage. So, and can I just echo your comments about our commitment? And I think it's a really important commitment that because, I echo this because my caveat on the recommendation or change to recommendation could suggest that we are not fully behind this project. That's not the case. It's just being fully aware of the changing position and financial risks associated with the project that I want to put the caveat in, providing it doesn't cause problems. The commitment to the project is absolutely, unfaltering. And hopefully that was, and it's really exciting to see Cambridgeshire's and Sutton Prior in national publications like the Times recently, where the article highlighted, what a fantastic community effort this was in partnership with the council. So thank you. Just on the question, Cheryl, with regard to the impact of my change to recommendation, if you could just answer, that would be helpful.
So on the basis that Matthew said we're moving forward, we're going to use the commercial NPV as our benchmark. No, that shouldn't have any impact.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Sorry, my
Councillor
question.
Bradley.
Sorry, could I just ask? My question was about will the delay, if it has to come back? I mean, Cheryl's saying it won't come back, but if it doesn't need to come back, then in a sense your amendment is redundant.
Just if I may, just to say that the amendment is, I agree, I can understand why it may appear redundant, but I think what the last 24 hours has proven to us is that things have changed very rapidly and can change again. So I wanted to give committee assurance that, we wouldn't just be continuing without, that kind of a caveat that we would keep a close eye on it not dropping below the line, as it were, with the NPV. So yes, I hope it is a redundant addition. I really do. That'd be great. But I don't think it's wise for us not to continue without it. With regard to, before and Cheryl will add if I've got this wrong, but with regard to it coming back to committee, that does present significant risk because of the timeline with the grant funding and the government grant fund rounds or timelines. So I would obviously prefer it doesn't come back to committee unless it absolutely has to, and that we get the sign off as the recommendation has suggested with weeks, which allows us to secure the government funding. If we are not in that position, then obviously we need to bring it back to committee anyway, because we will find ourselves in a very significant change in our finances if we don't secure the government grant and funding. Cheryl, sorry, I don't know if that's covered or whether you have anything to add to those comments.
I think I agree with you. So no. So the only reason for coming back would be if things substantially change on the finances and we don't have a viable project that delivers against that commercial NPV of 1.5 million.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And thank you. And I think that at that point, it definitely should come back. So that's hopefully that caveat will trigger that coming back to committee if necessary. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. I simply wanted to say that I think this is, we can see that this is it is a pioneering project, and I'm very proud that we're doing it in Cambridgeshire. And I think we're necessary because it meets our climate change or goes towards us meeting our climate change objectives. And I think we're fortunate to have such entrepreneurial staff and officers who are prepared to keep on and persist in the face of a number of complex problems and challenges. So thank you very much to the staff, and I will be supporting this wholeheartedly. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. So I have, Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that, of course, we support the project. There's no question about that. I think that the risks have been explained very well. All the prior discussions that I've been involved in, I've appreciated the clear attention that's been paid by the officers, particularly by Cheryl, also by Matthew. And so I would say that despite, well, the risks having been set out very clearly, the caveat that you've put, Chair, I would support the project and thank the officers for all the work that's gone into it and the clarity with which they've explained it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would just like to say that I fully support this pioneering scheme because I do think it's extremely valuable for residents of the whole of Cambridgeshire, and it will help the scheme that's developing in my division in the villages of Great Staunton, Perry and Graffham, where we're looking for a similar scheme. So, you know, all we can do to try and get residents off oil and onto a renewable source of heat, will so much the better. So I fully support the scheme.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that, of course, I fully support the scheme, and I fully support everything about what we're trying to do within this county by this authority to reduce our carbon footprint. You can only do things you really want to do if you have enough financial support to enable you and to help you do that. I was looking at this paper over the last, well, I don't know how long, week or so, and as a business plan, well, there isn't a business plan because it's all, well, we assume this might happen. The government may give us 1.8 million, but then it could be 2.8 million. We don't really know. We could get paid back 24, it could be 31 years. And we're assuming this, and then the paper goes on to go, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, you know, and normally you'd go, well, I think that should go back to where it started, then you could start again. However, I do get what this project's about. And as I said, I do support it, and I support it now because previous to this meeting, Chair, I could not have supported recommendation E. But your caveat, you've put in recommendation E, and I would really insist that the NPV at worst must be cost neutral. Anything below that, and that puts the project in unviable. So yes, as long as it's cost neutral, I'm happy to support your change to recommendation E. And it's okay for this committee to delegate its responsibility, delegate the authority to spend money to other people when it's actually this committee who should take full responsibility. And I'm okay with that with the officers, as long as you, Chair, and our Vice Chair. But let's not forget the Green Advisory Group, or just that, an advisory group. The actual decision making comes with this committee. So any major decision change, I would like it to come back to committee, and if required. And also, even if it goes ahead, Chair, I would also like a paper in the future, in the near future, to come back to committee to give us a positive review once all the costs and all the facts are confirmed. But I support this completely now. You've changed that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. And I can give you my absolute assurance that, firstly, if this project were to significantly change to, as the caveat says, a negative NPV, when we take into account the commercial NPV, then there'll be no delegation to the given to the officers. You know, in consultation with myself, I certainly wouldn't be signing that off, and I'm sure the officers wouldn't be either. They'd be bringing that back to committee, and it certainly won't be the last time we hear Swaffham Prior Community Heat Network. I'm sure a paper will be coming back when we've secured grants funding, hopefully, and hopefully we'll have a paper coming back looking at, you know, construction timetables. There's an awful long way to go yet. But I absolutely hear your comments, Councillor Hudson, that we need to keep a close eye on this. We don't delegate our authorities out and you know, let other people make decisions for us. The responsibility sits with this committee, and I will make sure it keeps coming back to it. And I really appreciate, I have to say, all of the members is close scrutiny of these projects, because it's important that we do ask those difficult questions and make sure we fully understand the risks associated. So, members, I have heard, just to finish before I move to the vote, just to say that, you know, I do recognise as chairman of this committee that this project sits within my county division, and I'm incredibly pleased and proud that that is the case. But that's not as a result of my involvement with the Environment and Sustainability Committee or my previous role in the commercial investment, but actually moreover as a result of two fantastic local people who have driven this project from the outset, in Emma Fletcher and Mike Barker, who have been an absolute conduit to making this happen. So if I have had received, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise to some members, I've received some criticism to say, you know, how come it's in your patch as chairman of the committee? I can't lay claim to why it's there. It's because there is passionate people within my area that have driven this forward. So if you have a community like Grafton Water do that want to drive their own project, please encourage it, because it's the only way that these things really will happen. So with that final comment, I've had no other indication for speakers. I've had no indication from members that anybody intends to vote against, to the contrary of the recommendations, including the caveat that I've introduced and the amendment to recommendation E. So that being the case, I will take it as unanimously supported unless I see a raised hand in the next few moments. Good, then Cheryl and Matthew, thank you both very much. And I hope that it gives you the assurance that you need that this is unanimously supported from this committee, and hopefully an indication of our passion for this project as well. Thank you. So we now move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 6. And this is the annual carbon footprint report for 2019-20. And the Energy Manager, Sarah Wilkinson, is going to introduce this report. So I'd like to invite Sarah to take us through. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this report is presenting data on the Council's greenhouse gas emissions for the financial year April 2019 to March 2020. And the data shows that the Council's own emissions for 1920 were very similar to the previous year at just over 200,000 tonnes CO2 equivalent, which includes indirect emissions from our supply chain partners and contractors. This is, of course, reflective of the fact that the reporting year 1920 was prior to the implementation of the Council's Climate Change and Environment Strategy in May 2020. And I should note that the vast majority of that year was, of course, also prior to the COVID-19 global pandemic, which changed ways of working for many people from March 2020 onwards. Now, the emissions data is broken down into 3 scopes. Scope 1 is direct emissions from our assets, such as gas and oil heating in buildings and fleet vehicles. And that's the area where we have the most control. Scope 2 is from purchased electricity for our buildings and for our street lighting. And Scope 3 is indirect emissions from such as staff-owned vehicles, contractors and suppliers. And that scope accounts for the vast majority, or 96% actually, of all our emissions. A full breakdown is shown on page 51 in your document pack in the accompanying report. And I should also say that as well as presenting the Council's own organisational carbon footprint, the report also looks separately at the carbon footprint of the whole county beyond the Council's own operations. The most recent data available for that is the calendar year 2018, and those are published by national government. County-wide CO2 emissions from across all Cambridgeshire were just over 4.5 million tonnes in 2018. That's a 1.8% reduction since the previous year, and most of that reduction is due to the continued greening of the electricity grid. The largest share of emissions county-wide was from the transport sector at 44%, which you can see on page 64. However, this doesn't include greenhouse gases other than CO2, as the stats for those are only published for the whole country and are not broken down by local authority area. We do, of course, have an indication of the complete picture from the research team, the Cuspy research team from last year. But I should also say that CO2 does account for 81% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. So there we have it, both the Council's own emissions and county-wide data presented there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's worth noting that this is obviously the first of its kind in the reporting of these figures and details. And can I sincerely again thank Sarah for her hard work on this and the presentation of it, because I think it's really effective and really a really good and easy read for us to understand. And caveat the change in position with this is our year one position, and Sarah kindly sort of briefed me on the. Sorry, was that correct, Sarah?
No, this is the second annual report. So we produced one last year at the same time as we published the climate change strategy, but that was, of course, from the even previous year.
Yeah, thank you. So what I should have made that clearer. This is our year one from our baseline position report. So since we've done our actions, since we put our strategy in place, this is, and the reason I make this comment is because we can't expect the actions that we've taken already to be having a significant impact on those numbers to see vast improvements, as you'd imagine, committee, that it doesn't happen overnight, the reductions. And also there's very significant other impacts on the amount of carbon produced, such as, and again, Sarah kind of pointed out, things like weather, how cold our winter is can affect, obviously, how much carbon we produce, emit as a result of heating our buildings, etc. Whereas over time, what we should see in future reports is a general trend that is not so influenced by those other factors. And so we can see a sort of general reduction as a result of our mitigations. So I just wanted to caveat that, members, because if not, it can look potentially like we're not making the progress that we had all hoped that we're going to. So I'll move to questions, please, on the report, firstly, from members. So Councillor Scott, is this a question for Sarah?
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. I've got 3 questions and just 2 smaller points. I was looking at page 52, paragraph 1.3, which is about buildings and utilities. This is at the outset of the report. And I actually just had a question about the Octagon building, because I understand that we still have workers in the Octagon building, but I also understand that there are some problems there with heating. And I wanted to know whether that building has double or triple glazing, something to hold the heating in, because if the heating's escaping, and that's why the workers are not being served well by the heating system, then that's negative from a carbon footprint point of view. I mean, double glazing or triple glazing would help the carbon footprint. Then at paragraph 1.4, page 53, which is on transport, I noted the reference to Amy and they deal with waste. And I'm just wondering, I know that we can't absolutely control Amy, but I'm wondering whether they have electrical vehicles, and if they don't, if they have a program for moving over to them. And that, of course, raises the issue of contract compliance and whether the county should, the council should be adopting fully contract compliance, which means that we contract only with firms or companies that actually have really good how can I put it, climate aware policies themselves and are pursuing them. And I'm just wondering about Amy in that regard generally, but specifically on the electrical vehicles, because that goes to the waste question. And then the third issue is on page 54, paragraph 1.5, the issue of schools. Now, I note there that the comment is made that this is about maintained schools and that we have no control over academies again. Now, the problem there is that the buildings that they have were our buildings, and we had to hand them over, holus bolus, lock, stock and barrel. And therefore, I'm wondering if there's some way that we can actually require, encourage, ensure that the academies are actually taking action in relation to climate change, because in the end, the maintained schools are a small part of the school's program, or the school component of the Cambridgeshire as a county. And the academies really should be taking action in this regard. Now, the two very small points. At page 56, third para, line 2, the word against appears by reason of typographical error. It talks about mitigate, and mitigate stands on its own. It doesn't need against next to it. And then on page 91, this is actually, I really have to raise it, because if I didn't raise it and it went through, I would look most remiss. On page 91, I think it's paragraph 2.2.4. It
91.
91, yeah, page 91.
My report doesn't go up to that page.
Oh, sorry. Oh, beg your pardon. Okie doke then. I'll stop at 56. I'd gone on with the rest of this this issue addressing the climate change question. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And I'll bring Sarah in to answer those questions, and I'm sure that small typo can be amended in the carbon report. Before I do, I'm sure you've now triggered a number of researchers who are waiting to join us to flick to page 91 of their report and be looking very closely to find out where they're going to be receive a comment. So anyway, I will move to Sarah on the other question.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. There's a few points there. The octagon, obviously this report is data from 1920. It's a while since I've been in there. I can't remember whether there's double glazing at the octagon. Somebody else might actually know that.
I should say I understand, Sarah. Yes, I was raising it because I think it would be good if it could be looked into. So if you don't have the information at the moment, I absolutely understand that. Yeah.
Yes. Apologies, I don't know that. Obviously, as we're moving out of that building in the next few months, I'm not sure whether there would be much we could do about that at this point, but you are right in general that obviously buildings without double glazing do lose heat. Of course, that is an important factor, and it's one we're addressing in our low carbon heat programme at other sites. On Amy and their waste transport, obviously, just to clarify, this doesn't include waste collection, which is of course the district council's responsibility. This is just the transport that is involved in their part of the process in treatment and disposal of waste, such as the facilities at Waterbeach and the household recycling centres. As far as I know, I'm not aware of them operating electric vehicles. That's something we could check with Amy.
Sorry, could I just, I beg your pardon for interrupting, but I know that the district council and the city council in their waste program, domestic waste program, they are introducing electrical vehicles, and that's because I know that, and because I suppose we know that the buses are going that way too. I did just wonder in the component that Amy does deal with, which relates to the county, whether they're doing the same. So thank you. And
Sorry, Sarah, if I may, I know that I don't want to get too much in the specific details of the Amy situation. I appreciate the point is important, but this is about the general reporting of our carbon, but more generally around how we would deal with our contractors. I think there is definitely, and again, I may ask Cheryl to comment or Sarah about how we go forward with procurement of contract, and how we would incorporate the carbon agenda into those procurement. So companies such as Amy would be expected to highlight their carbon and strategies, reduction strategies, and climate change improvement strategies, so that we could look at those elements when securing and scoring our procurement processes. Cheryl, did you want to come in at that point?
Just on the procurement, so Emily, who's also on here, with Sarah, have started a project which is with the Local Government Association to look at getting a carbon calculator tool and guidance for future procurement, so that we can ask suppliers or potential suppliers to provide us what the carbon footprint of that service for us will look like, so that we can ask them to demonstrate reductions in that carbon footprint over the lifetime of their project or service to us. So Emily and Sarah are starting down that pathway.
Yeah. That's
Thank you both.
You're right to raise that. Sorry.
No, thank you very much, and that's really great news, and hopefully gives Councillor Scott a little bit of reassurance that we are on that path, and we'll be looking at that. And it's really important that we do, because if we're going to invest money, as our previous item suggests, that we're going to put money into reducing our carbon, that's going to be short-sighted if we then find that we're signing contracts. However, they may be if they may be a little bit financially more viable or cheaper for us to procure, if they introduce or continue to introduce greater carbon impacts, then it ends up being a sort of negative spiral of us having to put more money to offset our carbon, etc. So I think it's a really important element of our general carbon reduction. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Scott. Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. There was another question?
There's just another question about academy schools.
Oh yes, sorry. Thank you.
I suppose the only thing I can say about that is, because since academy schools are responsible for their own utilities, they're perhaps slightly outside of our control.
I think, yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate we can't do a lot, and certainly it's not a scope 1 element, because they're not our assets or buildings or schools anymore. However, I would make it very clear that our schools energy programme, from my understanding, treats academies no different to the way it treats our maintained schools. So if there are academies which it's in their interest to reduce their carbon and therefore and consequently their energy bills, we will be supporting them without prejudice, whether they be academy or maintained. So but thank you again for raising that point. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. So one comment and one question, please. One comment is following on from what Councillor Scott said. Yes, certainly the Greater Cambridge Shared Waste Partnership is currently operating 100% electric bin lorry, which can be seen around the place. And in fact, if I had the South Cambs magazine, I could show you a picture of it. I might even have that close by. And they are also looking to replace their fleet gradually with electric lorries. But the question I wanted to ask was about on page 54, there's reference to the fact that, and indeed Sarah Wilkinson said it in her introduction, that 96% of our carbon emissions come from scope 3 transport of vehicles from employees under the council's control, if I've understood you correctly.
96% of our emissions are from all of scope 3. So scope 3 is anything that isn't our own assets. Okay. And I gave employees' vehicles as an example, but the lion's share of that is our contractors and suppliers.
Okay, so I just wondered, so thank you for that clarification, Sarah. But I imagine does that also include members? Because I imagine in this year that, well, for employees as well, who are all largely working from home, as indeed you are,
yes. I
guess that will have been considerably reduced in terms of employees and members. And so I wondered, do you have I'm not asking for the number, but I'm asking what proportion of that scope 3 emissions are from employee miles, as it were, employee commuting, and from member commuting?
So I don't have a breakdown of employees versus members because we all use the same system.
Yeah, I mean in total.
So I have a grant. Yes. So it's if you look on page 51 under transport, we've got business travel.
Okay.
Now you'll see where it says in scope 3 business travel 1,887. Now part of that I'd have to probably most of that is mileage from mileage claims, obviously staff and members, mostly staff, but it would also include a small amount for other business travel, like train tickets and hotels, occasional things like that.
So what I was thinking is, with the new change to the hub at Alconbury, and a lot of people working from home and possibly may continue to do so for all we know, I would have thought there's a possibility of reducing that particular scope 3 emissions quite considerably. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yes, I think, well, certainly with more people working from home and generally not travelling much at all over the last several months, I would expect travel, business travel, to be lower when we're looking back on this year. Next year, when we're looking back on this year.
Yes. So all I'm thinking is that would be quite aspirational for us as an Environment and Sustainability Committee. That, you know, for example, you know, it's something we could take forward as a proposal, isn't it? That we might even want to consider, for example, continuing with online meetings, even if, you know, even when we've been vaccinated and all of that, and the COVID conditions change.
I would, if I may just come in there, I'd love to say that that's within the remit of this committee, but I think what we could do is certainly consider how we, absolutely, but we could certainly consider looking into the impact of us continuing virtual meetings and the carbon offsetting that may be attributed to that in more detail, and if so, make a recommendation to either the council or the GPC that we would look to have a policy in place about how we conduct meetings virtually or in person, and when we do, so that we could hopefully still recognise and appreciate those carbon reductions. But I think, you know, it's a good point to raise, and hopefully we'll also see a reduction, Councillor Bradnam, as a result of the more electric vehicles within our fleet and our employees' vehicles themselves. So there are, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that an aspiration to reduce that significantly, you know, 50% kind of reduction isn't unachievable because of the new ways of working, because of the new technologies that we have around transport and the electrification of transport. So yes, thank you for highlighting that point, and it'll be interesting to look back at the next year's report and see the impacts of the last year and how that number may have changed in the 12 months. So if just before I bring in Councillor Dupre, I just wanted to make a comment on the general, the electric vehicle, waste vehicles in particular. And just to caveat, I mean, I think it's absolutely brilliant that Cambridge City and certain areas can get electric waste vehicles. However, it's worth noting that the more rural areas would, at the minute with the technology, would struggle to have electric waste vehicles because of the mileage they cover, because of the nature of the vehicles themselves. I understand that there isn't a product on the market which would mean that they could successfully carry out their waste collections with an electric vehicle. And so it's, however, there's a lot of moving parts, and we may see the way that we collect waste changing over the next coming years. And I think it's a really good aspiration to move to seeing the electrification of waste vehicles, but it's not something that we can roll out today as saying that that's a commitment we should be making, because it's just not possible. So, and not only is it not possible, it's also worth noting that I started looking into this possibility in the future, and there is a net negative carbon implication of getting rid of a number of waste vehicles, waste vehicles that are not electric, very quickly to produce electric vehicles, the impact of producing those electric vehicles, if that vehicle isn't of a certain age, the petrol or diesel powered vehicle, then actually it becomes a negative position if you start switching all in a quick succession. The best thing to do, as it sounds like some other members have noted, is to see that when we've seen vehicles come to the end of their natural life, then we replace them at that point, as opposed to wholesale replacing of vehicles. Anyway, I just wanted to make those because it's a point which I know is being raised in many forums around our waste service, and wanted to be clear that it isn't sadly possible at the minute for everybody to switch to electric. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. Just firstly to say on online meetings, I mean, I'm a huge fan of them. I think they have been fantastic for all sorts of reasons, not just environmental ones. And I very much hope that the administration of this council is lobbying its friends in government to persuade them to extend the provision for online meetings well beyond the immediate situation, and indeed in perpetuity, because I think they're fantastic. Employee miles, I note that we had a business case put forward for a saving of over £500,000 a year in employee mileage, and that's bound to have a carbon impact positively for us. So I think that's good to know as well, and I think that there's benefits to be had there in terms of carbon as well as money. My final point was about the public transport on page, where are we, 54. Because the combined authority, which is the transport authority, delegated its public transport budget back to us last year, we therefore have included some scope 3 emissions. My assumption therefore is that for reporting on the current year, when it's over, those scope 3 emissions, because the combined authority has taken back its transport authority responsibilities, and as far as I know, it isn't intending to produce a carbon report of this nature itself, that those emissions will simply, if you pardon the pun, disappear into thin air and won't be reported anywhere. If that's the case, then it does highlight the importance, it seems to me, of other agencies getting on board with this and reporting their emissions as well in the way that we do. And I very much hope, again, that lobbying is being done. I think the combined authority is somewhat behind the curve on this. And I very much hope that as a major player that they will be up to speed and doing their full reporting soon.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Bradnam, I notice you've indicated again.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to point out that to labour the point, the Greater Cambridge Waste Service includes South Cambs District Council and the City. It is a joint shared service. And as you pointed out, the programme of replacement of lorries has been on need for replacement. So the first one we have as a fully working unit is because we needed to replace a unit. And as I said, the programme is on replacement. But also I wanted to point out we are rural in South Cambs District Council, and some of our vehicles go as far as Gamlingay, and I've been struggling to work out how many miles that is, but I would say 20 or 30 anyway. So, I think that's indication that this is something that we're taking on board and is being used. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. And I wasn't suggesting that you had said otherwise with regard to your placement vehicles, so apologies if that sounded the case. I just didn't want people to think we were going to replace them all overnight and actually have a negative carbon impact by doing so. I have to say it did make me smile that we go as far as Gamlingay. I think if my councillor colleague John Gowing would probably suggest that in the more rural parts of the Fens that we go a lot further, and one of the vehicles, I think East Cambs waste vehicles, I think they cover around 150 miles sometimes on their rounds, so it does present a huge challenge. But thankfully technologies are coming forward that will hopefully see those challenges being met. Councillor Bradley.
Fair point. Camlingay is only 16 miles.
Thank you. Sorry, Steve Cox, Executive Director of Place Economy. Did you want to make a comment? I noticed your hand went up, but then came down.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just on Councillor Dupre's point, exactly right. The delegation to us from the Combined Authority of the Passenger Transport functions will come to an end at the end of this year. So we'll have data for this year, but what we can do in the discussions around handover of that or passing back of that, we can certainly highlight what was suggested in terms of continuing to be able to monitor the carbon impact. So we'll pick that point up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, I haven't heard any comments that we don't wish to note the report as requested and that anyone disagrees with the contents. I would request that if members have a look at the report and in the weeks or months ahead suddenly feel that there's a part of it that would be benefit from a small change or alteration, to please report that to Sarah. I'm sure Sarah will be most grateful for any comments around the structuring and reporting of the carbon impacts. So with that in mind, I just want to end again once more to say thank you, a huge thank you to Sarah for the work on this. I think it's a really brilliant report, and I'm sure that I echo the thoughts of my colleagues when I say that. So I will move it to the vote, and I would again accept that as unanimously supported, unless I see any indications by show of hands to the contrary. None at all. Thank you very much, Sarah. We now move on to our next agenda item, and this is agenda item number 7. And this is the CUSPI 2020 Decarbonisation, Cambridgeshire Decarbonisation Fund report. And we have Cheryl here has been overseeing and supporting the researchers from the Cambridge University Science and Policy Exchange. So I think Cheryl will possibly be taking a lead on introducing the report before handing over to the researchers. But for the benefit of the public and members, we have a number of researchers here today. I think they're just turning their cameras on, a number of them that they're able to. Thank you so much for your patience, and apologies, our meeting's a little bit later than you were probably advised it would be. So to welcome Angela, Harper, Kenza, Sabine, Campbell, Anna, and Quadwo to the Environment and Sustainability Committee, and to hand over to Cheryl for a brief introduction before the researchers take us through the report. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes, this is the first time, I think, working with researchers that has been through a COVID pandemic. So we've only ever met online. And so it's been a different experience for all of us this year. And I think we've had to learn quite a lot on how you can do a piece of research collectively, and probably none of you actually meet each other as well in terms of the researchers. So thank you for working with us. We've actually learned a lot in the process of the researchers bringing forward this report. We've learned a lot around what is out there in terms of decarbonisation funds. And we've also learned a lot about, what are the challenges if you do try and bring forward a fund, and what are the mechanisms that you're going to try and put into place. So what I think we should do here is have the researchers put forward their presentation and we'll go through that, and then we can have a discussion on some of the details of the findings, and then move back to what are the recommendations coming forward, which are to think about the next steps of where we might want to take this piece of work, and then also to consider how we look and scope where Cambridgeshire wants to be in terms of its ambition. So if I pass over to the researchers to do your report, they will come back to that discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Cheryl. I'm just going to share my screen quickly here, if I'm able to do that. And Cheryl, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Cheryl and Councillor Schumann, for the introduction. We're going to present to you here a short report which summarizes some of the findings that we've presented to you in our report, which you've received. And so today it's going to be myself, Angela Harper, and Sabina talking to you today, but this was a project that was comprised of the 7 people who are on this call right now, and whose names are at the bottom here. So to take you through kind of the background of where we started with this report is the 2019 policy challenge, which was briefly mentioned earlier in the meeting, in which we identified both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's total carbon footprint in 2017. And one of the most important pieces of this project, which was relevant for us, was the breakdown of carbon emissions into different sectors. So they identified that The transport and domestic buildings accounted for almost 60% of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's carbon emissions, and that commercial services for another 27%. Of course, we've seen these updated numbers, but at the time of writing this report, these were the numbers that we had to go with. So what this accounted to is that in this area, we had a total of emissions of 6.1 million tons of CO2 per year, with a potential amount of emissions up to 5 million tons coming from peatland. And so it's very clear from this pie chart and from the findings that we have that it's important to make a change and start acting on this now if we're going to reach our carbon targets by 2050. And one of the things that we've come up with in our report is that we need to act now because in 2050, we have the opportunity to either be a carbon sink, so a county which is able to actually sequester more carbon than it emits, or not reach our targets and become a carbon source, a county which would be emitting more carbon than it was sequestering. And so we've come up with a potential opportunity for the county, which sort of brings together these areas that we're emitting carbon in the domestic sector, in the community, and through businesses. And that here is our Decarbonization Contribution Fund, which we're going to present some of the work for you today. So the idea behind the Cambridgeshire Decarbonization Fund is that we have 3 different parts of Cambridgeshire County working together. So this is local Cambridgeshire business, which are going to invest in projects that come directly from either the Cambridgeshire County Council or from community members within Cambridgeshire, which will then go back through and contribute to not just CO2 reduction, but also improving the societal well-being, community revitalization, and really important kind of effects for the county that go well beyond just reaching our 2050 net zero target. So the idea behind this fund is that it's created to connect the 3 parts of the county that work together and reach our goal of becoming net zero by 2050 and ultimately becoming a carbon sink by 2050. And so to create this fund, there's a couple of different aspects that we talk about and have put together. The first of which is actually what type of projects might be beneficial and what type of projects are already going on in Cambridgeshire to contribute to this project. So we've come up with here a list of projects in tiers, and these 3 tiers go along with the phrase avoid, reduce, and sequester. So what we looked into as we went through projects such as Swaffham Prior, which we talked about earlier in the meeting, all the way down to tree planting in Cambridgeshire, which is quite a common carbon reduction project to have, is we found that projects like Swaffham Prior, which have been talked about, and other zero emissions housing projects, which completely avoid carbon emissions at all, are some of the more expensive projects. Projects which we reduce carbon, but we don't completely end up avoiding carbon emissions are sort of middle tier, and carbon sequestration is at the bottom because in the 2019 report, we identified that carbon sequestration could be a really beneficial way to reduce our carbon emissions in Cambridgeshire, but also that that's quite a limited option for us. So to actually have the sustained biodiversity that Cambridgeshire has and continue on that line, we actually can't sequester any more than, I believe the number is 5,000 hectares of land throughout the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, as defined in that report. So what we've come up with here is this list of projects. We've put on projects that are already in existence, but we'd recommend that this project list be fed into not only by the County Council and the projects that you all are wanting to create, but also by the community as well, so that we're putting projects into this decarbonisation fund, which are going to be beneficial for everyone as a part of this community. So that's the first part of this decarbonisation fund for Cambridgeshire, which is the project list. And I'll turn it over to Sabina, who's going to discuss a little bit more of the details of this project.
Thank you, Angela. So of course, for a fund through which businesses will be able to offset their emissions, we would need a carbon price. And we're suggesting to model that along the fair trade carbon price, which is already existing and basically just means that you're covering your project costs through these carbon credits. And in our Cambridgeshire carbon price, we're excluding revenues at the moment, but this could be included once they become apparent in the future. And we're also suggesting to use a fund rather than a matching scheme where businesses would fund a particular project. And in a fund, you would then need to average over the different carbon prices per project. But it would still mean that 1 Cambridgeshire carbon credit equals 1 ton of CO2 equivalents, but from any of the projects in the fund. We're also not currently accounting for inflation, but this could also easily be included in the future if that's desired. Could you please go to the next slide? Excellent. So, of course, as Angela said in the introduction, decarbonisation is never just done for the sake of decarbonisation, but also includes a lot of co-benefits in other areas, which we have summarised here. So socially, our fund would hopefully increase democratic oversight in emissions, that community members have a sense of this is what is happening in Cambridgeshire, these are our emissions, and this is what we're doing in our county. And we think this would also improve the feeling of a just energy transition, going from a fuel-based energy to renewable energies. And it would also enable Cambridgeshire to have more tailored solutions tailored to the realities of how Cambridgeshire people are living here, maybe compared to other parts of the country where we would need other tailored solutions. And one really massive driver of the whole Cambridgeshire Decarbonisation Fund is that it would reduce fuel poverty, which is a really impressive problem, and lots of other counties are working on that. So hopefully projects like Swaffham Prior would improve this situation in Cambridgeshire as well. Economically, so from the business side, the fund would offer a sense of ownership of local emissions because these emissions would be offset in the same area where they're emitted. It might create further jobs and local expertise in renewable energies and a green future. It might help with future tax mitigation. This is really an open point because we don't know what the UK is going to introduce in the next few years concerning a carbon tax. But hopefully, if there is one, the CO2 carbon credits that we would offset through our fund would count as being offset and wouldn't include a further tax. But this is an open point. And businesses will also be open to prove their social responsibility by offsetting their emissions through a Cambridgeshire fund and not some global fund. And of course, offsetting carbon and reducing emissions would also improve air conditions and the air quality, which is very beneficial to health and would reduce the burden on our NHS. And with that, let me move on to our key recommendations from our report and our research. So first, we are proposing to have a call for project proposals from communities, probably facilitated by you, by the councillors and the different councils. From this project proposal list, we would suggest to look at these tiers that we're proposing and come up with a good mix of all 3 tiers, potentially with a focus on the first 2 tiers, so avoiding and reducing, because sequestering is limited. Then we would also suggest to consider the co-benefits and policy implications of each individual project, and maybe potentially also quantitatively analyze these and potentially also price them out. This is something we haven't done in our report because of the time scope, but which could potentially be done and included in the pricing. And we're also strongly encouraging that businesses should show that they're actively reducing emissions and not only offsetting their emissions, because this is a really important factor. And offsetting always has the risk of rebound effects. So this is something that could ideally be included as a requirement for business to join this fund. So the final 2 points are about how to go in the future with this fund. So something which we also would have hoped to do this year, but it wasn't possible because of the COVID-19 situation, is to reach out to businesses and gain some insight what their incentives will be, what their requirements will be to actually offset their emissions through a fund which is based in Cambridgeshire. And the final thing is that we suggest to identify an additional source of funding to initialize the fund, because we think the initial phase of the fund will be financially tricky, and before the fund can actually show that it has a portfolio of funded projects and businesses that have already invested, we think it would be beneficial to have some additional source of funding. This could be that it's open to individuals as well to offset their emissions. It could include some kind of fuel tax or some kind of development tax that other counties have introduced in the UK, where new developments have to pay some kind of penalty for their emissions. But this is really open to you, what you think would be beneficial for Cambridgeshire. It's just that we think some additional funding for the initial phase of the fund would be good. And with that, our main recommendation is that you should create a Cambridgeshire Decarbonization Fund, and it will be really beneficial for reaching net zero in Cambridgeshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of them.
Yes, indeed, and thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to, sorry, I missed piece from my earlier list when I was listing the researchers, and so thank you all. And I know that very short presentation, it certainly doesn't do justice to the huge amount of research that has gone behind that piece of work. So thank you sincerely from the council to the researchers. I will pass over in a minute to Councillor Scutt on page 91. It sounds like some kind of episode from a series. But before I do, I just wanted to point out that some of the suggestions in the creation of the Decarbonisation Fund, I think, are really exciting and give us a real opportunity to debate and consider that through the relevant, whatever governance structure that will be, whether it be this committee or a separate organisation that will go on to, and I know the report touches on how that will be governed, to go on to create the fund. The idea of us insisting that people that sign up have to meet some kind of criteria of reducing their own carbon emissions, I think is a really positive step. This is not simply about creating a pot that people can, or businesses can, put money into and sleep better at night knowing that they've done their bit. This is about us making a real difference. So I think it's really good to, and the right thing to identify that we have expectations for our investors, as it were, to do their own thing as well. And that goes back to the earlier point I made about this sort of negative spiral. If we don't do that, then it doesn't matter what we try to achieve with this fund, if it just allows people to continue to their normal practices, which may be carbon intensive. So I will, with that sort of few comments from myself, I will hand over to Councillor Scutt, if Councillor Scutt wishes to come in at this point to touch on the comment on the report itself. Thank you, Councillor Scutt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the project team. It certainly is a very interesting and well-researched project, bar what's on page 91. But before going to page 91, I was just interested in the list of community-based projects, because in your number one category, the most expensive, as an example, there's the Swaffham Prior project. But in the number two category, that's where retrofitting comes. Now, retrofitting is actually really much more expensive, isn't it, than starting off from from a carbon neutral position. So I was just interested that was in the second, although perhaps I can see that the rationale is that if something's already been done wrongly or wrong, and then it needs to be corrected, then the correction would in the end be less expensive than actually doing it correctly in the first instance. That's a real pity, however. But I did want to come to page 91 because I would be remiss if I didn't raise it. You see, it refers to Melbourne, Sydney, Moreland and Yarra as cities in Australia where they've all taken this, they've met positive ends in terms of carbon reduction and climate change and so forth. Now, they all are cities, but Yarra, Y-A-R-A, is actually a city in Brazil. Y-A-R-R-A is actually a city in Victoria, in Australia. So I'm just suggesting that you put the extra R in. And I should just add that it's interesting, and it may be of interest to members of the council, that Yarra City is in the western suburbs. And contrary to the position in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, the western suburbs are always regarded as lower socioeconomic. So it's actually really positive that Yarra City in Victoria has actually taken this positive approach toward climate change and carbon reduction and so forth. And so it shows that it can be done, and therefore the parts of Cambridgeshire that are less well off economically, we should be able to introduce projects that are carbon reductive and positive in terms of climate change. And that's an indication that it really can be done. But thank you very much for a very interesting report and a very worthwhile proposal. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And I certainly wouldn't dream of challenging you on your knowledge of the Australian cities. So I will. I'm sure the researchers will take that away and make the amendment in their the report or to the report. With regard to your question around the scoping and the what goes onto which area. Perhaps the researchers could just touch on those scoping. I think they were probably examples as opposed to a steadfast list of what fits into where, because my understanding is that there'd almost be an appraisal of each project that came forward, and that would determine which pot it fell in with regard to, you know, the different scopes and how difficult they are to deliver, etc., and the cost. But I don't know whether which researcher wishes to perhaps elaborate and answer that question. Is it Angela or Sabina or?
Yeah, I'm happy
Angela.
to answer that question.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank you very much. In regards to expense, I think it was less of which is costing more and a lot more about the tiers being avoid, reduce, and sequester, kind of in that order. I think there's somewhat of a tendency for those which avoid carbon reduction at all to be more expensive at this point in time, but that's not to say that it couldn't be the other way around. I think the tiers are really more so geared towards what type of project in terms of carbon reduction fits into that category. And along those lines, that's why we've also recommended that it's a fund rather than a matching scheme, so that we actually combine the overall carbon savings of each of the projects in each tier of that scheme together into one. Hopefully that answers a bit of your question.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Angela. Cheryl.
I was just thinking that the researchers might want to just expand on the fact that they did do some costings, which showed that it's clearly cheaper to sequester than it is to retrofit by quite a distance. And so if you didn't put in a structured tier system and you were a business, if you could get a carbon credit which costs you less, you would do that. So it's been part of the management process, but I didn't know if you wanted to just add to that at all from the team. Or was that enough?
I think,
Okay.
Sorry, Angela, yes, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, yeah, I think we did touch on it a little bit in the project, and I know that Anna has done some work on this as well. So if she wants to add to that at all, she definitely can. But yes, essentially sequestering, not only is it is less expensive, but also the effects of that are not immediately seen. And so it does take time for tree planting to actually come into effect. That's another part of the problem. But it does really represent an opportunity for us to kind of have more carbon reduction while also adding it to the cost of the other projects, which actually might be more long-term and or immediately effective for the county.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to touch any further on that issue raised? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was doing some of the pricing for the Swap and Prior project, and we found that, like, if you were to price it per ton of CO2 saved, that we were getting quite high carbon credit prices. And so part of the thinking in the end was that if you have an average price all over Cambridgeshire, it kind of stabilizes the fund. And so people can put in a set amount and they know they're saving a set amount of CO2. So like Cheryl and Angela have said, it kind of, yeah, it provides an average price rather than companies being able to say, oh, we'll put in this amount of money and we'll get way more tons of CO2 saved because we're sequestering, versus investing in a project like Swaffham Prior.
Thank you very much. And that's a really helpful explanation, because again, it goes back to that earlier comment I made about sort of, businesses or individuals being able to sleep better at night if they can pay for a tree to be planted, outside of the country. That, although does have benefits, it doesn't directly benefit Cambridgeshire the way that it could do. So it's really important that we've, made a sort of uniformed approach to how we would value the carbon and mix all of our projects into one, so that we deliver the more challenging alongside the easier ones. Just depending on how we feel that the project and fund should be managed, and projects should come forward and their scoring criteria. Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. I think this is an absolutely excellent report, and it is a classic example of why the CUSPI programme is such a good thing. The benefits of the information, the thought, the gathering of evidence is just an absolute exemplar. So thank you very much indeed for that. Two issues, a small one first, which was I was rather alarmed in 1.4 to see that the scheme could have could achieve other co-benefits such as fuel poverty. I'm not sure that there are many people who would regard fuel poverty as a benefit, although I wouldn't put anything past Jacob Rees-Mogg. But I'm assuming that means that the benefit would be the alleviation or prevention of fuel poverty. So
yes, indeed, the reduction thereof, not the encouragement of. Thank you.
Indeed, let's not put ideas into ministers' heads, shall we? And the second issue was in section 3.5 on governance and administration. And once again, rather like my question on the last report, I come back to the role of the combined authority in this, and I would be grateful for clarification about how the combined authority is seen as a player in this, and how far a Cambridgeshire decarbonisation fund sits within Cambridgeshire County Council, when there is so much of what's happening which is the responsibility and under the influence of the combined authority, which is the body that has the money and so much strategic say, and as I said before, is really not in as advanced a position as we are with regard to thinking about these issues. So some explanation of what the combined authority's role in this is and how it's perceived as part of this project would be really quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I'll bring Cheryl in to answer the question perhaps around how our partner organisations may buy into our research or help or use it, and or the fund. Actually, that's it may be that additional funding that's Sabina highlighted, the combined authority may be absolutely perfectly placed to be one of those funders to help kickstart the fund. So I bring Cheryl in to answer that, but just as a general comment, I think it's the important and worth noting that everywhere I seem to look, when I look at the climate change strategies and works that are going on with other organisations, the previous research with the CUSPI paper on the Cambridgeshire carbon emissions seems to be quoted or used, and I really hope that similarly this decarbonisation fund is seen as a similarly powerful tool in meeting that ambition of reducing the carbon. Cheryl, did you want to answer the question around Cambridgeshire?
So there's two things. So we've engaged officers in the project team meetings with the researchers. So we had local authority officers from most of the local authorities. We certainly had City, South Cambs, Hunts. We had reps from East Cambs, Peterborough. I don't think, we might have had someone from Finland for one of them. So, and we also had a rep from CPCA, so the Combined Authority, Adrian Cannard, who actually attended most of them. So they've been part of the discussions around this fund, including just the interaction between what could be a voluntary fund and how that would work also with the ambitions of the districts through their planning role of delivering net zero carbon planning policy, and how future growth could potentially also be part of this process if there was an opportunity to offset. Separately, yesterday I was in a meeting with the group that are undertaking the research for the Climate Commission for Cambridgeshire. So headed up by Baroness Brown, it had Ian Leslie, Adrian Cannard was in there, and some others. And we had a conversation, and I think it was probably quite a robust conversation on both sides of what or where or how and should we have decarbonisation funds, which are more localised funds rather than a national fund. So we were having a debate between local and national, and we were also having a discussion on, well, just where is the level that you would want to sit a fund? And I think there was consensus that at a district level, it's too small. And actually, the bigger the area, the better you are in terms of managing offset funds locally. What was very clear from that discussion, though, is that to get to net zero, at the moment, you really must also have businesses delivering against what they can do. So if they've got buildings that they can reduce, if you've got transport that they can reduce the carbon impacts. So it's really about trying to identify, well, what are the things that you would want businesses to reduce? So it would be like offsetting air miles as an example, or offsetting those carbon emissions from products that you just can't get down to net zero. The Commission is doing some work on financial models. I think it's being headed up by Polly Coultis from the Institute of Sustainability. And so from my discussion yesterday with the CPCA, I'm going to try and link into the finance group to have discussions to see what are the financial recommendations that Commission report is going to bring forward in February, to see whether what we're trying to do has some links or whether that's also coming out as a recommendation from their work. Does that help?
It does. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's brilliant. I have another question from Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I wanted to also thank the CUSB group, and it's so refreshing and interesting to hear you telling us new things that you've researched so thoroughly and really expanding our thoughts about how we can go forward with policy ideas. It's just incredibly refreshing. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for all your contributions on it. I just wanted to ask though, I was looking at page 108 of the agenda and looking at your reference to verification and validation, and there's a statement in there that says to have a robust structure, the following principles are indispensable, and the fourth one of those is guarantee of measurable or impact-led benefits to local stakeholders. And I'm just slightly wanting to ask the question is, if that was monitored and it was found that we hadn't delivered, would the fund suffer any sanction? I can see Cheryl nodding. Is there a risk that if we were found not to be delivering the benefits that we said we would as a sink, for example, if we found it was difficult to completely re-wet the fen or deliver the Great Fen project or plant millions of trees over East Cambridgeshire, would we have a sanction on the fund for that? Or any kind of detrimental issue? I don't know.
Do the researchers want to add anything, or do you want me to add something? Okay, I'll start and then we'll see if they want to add anything. So, well, yes, I mean, if what a business is paying for is carbon reductions and you can't demonstrate that that's what you've done, you've got a problem. Either you've got to bring in new projects which then will deliver, and effectively that's a cost. But one of the discussions that's really important is how are you going to measure and verify carbon reductions? And I think it's fair to say there's probably quite a lot of universities across the UK, including Cambridge University, who are doing work on verification processes and schemes. And The challenge is just how expensive those verification processes are going to be, but they're very necessary. Did any of the researchers want to add something? No. Okay.
So shall I make brief? Oh, sorry. Do one of the researchers want to come back?
Yeah, I think similar to if you check the proposed structure under how the fund is proposed to function in Figure 3. The last bit of it has recommendations and penalties where there's a review of the projects, the specific approved projects impacts that are to be realized. So at that micro level, if there are penalties for shortfalls and proposition for remedial works to be implemented, it would make sense that at the higher level, the use of the fund would have to be in a position such that it delivers the real benefits. And if there are not, there ought to be these self-checking measures to ensure that the businesses do not begin to question how their monies are being used and the desired impact that the regulatory body itself or even the county would want to see. So in order not to put the entire fund at risk, particularly in the beginning phases, it is important that these self-checking measures are in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Quadwo. And that's, I find that really reassuring to hear. And I think that's a really important comment because however, and please don't take this the wrong way to any future applicants to the fund, however well-meaning a project, if it then doesn't generate those real benefits, then it will undermine the whole fund in a heartbeat. So I think that reassurance that Quadwo has just highlighted and Cheryl also touched on is really important, especially in the early stages.
But we also need to be in a position to be clear that we can deliver those benefits in proportion to what we're being asked to deliver. Obviously, we'd start off in early phases first, wouldn't we? But we need to be sure that we don't take on more than we can deliver in the county.
Yeah, and I think that's important, and I think that's why the scoping will be really important to understand. Sometimes, especially at the earlier stages, I think it's reasonable to expect that we will look to the ones which provide greater benefit and present fewer risks and challenges. Because if we start taking on all of the huge chunks of the elephant, as to use the analogy, in at the early stages, then we'll just fail to deliver. And then the fund, those early investors or those early contributors to the fund will say, well, you said you were going to deliver these things and you failed. Why should we, why should others invest? Kind of attitude. So no, I think it's definitely worth teasing out, and really good point from researchers to have kind of included that as a check and balance in the process. Thank you. I have no. Oh, Cheryl, is that a hand from a previous comment, or did you wish to come back?
It was only to sort of follow on from what you were saying, Josh, to say this piece of work is a starting point. If we were going to progress to a decarbonisation fund, there's a lot more work and a lot more detail that would be required, and a strategic business case before we'd even look to get to that piece of setting something up.
Absolutely, and the important elements of any fund being the governance, oversight process and policies that manage that fund. We mentioned briefly earlier about the businesses and that we want to see that they were operating in a certain way which did reduce their carbon. Similarly, if anyone's going to invest in a fund, with my other hat on involved in the pension investment world, the first thing people look for is the sort of ESG, the governance, the environment, and so our own fund absolutely needs to meet those criteria of good governance and good processes and structures and environmental benefits. So we'd expect that. So yes, it is absolutely. This is about highlighting the potential, not identifying how it's going to be done. That would be the next challenge. Councillor Bradnam, did you want to come back?
Sorry, just one final point, Chairman, and that is, for example, you'll remember Councillor Shooter mentioned that we should be talking to government about the Swaffham Prior scheme with regard to the agricultural funding of it. And for example, that would be the sort of commitment that would help this scheme to go forward if we had buy-in from government that, for example, things like planting a lot of trees on farms could be supported under the same sort of, in the same sort of way that Councillor Shooter was talking about the Swaffham Prior. It's a kind of, these things need to be knitted together at quite an early stage to make sure that government recognises that one of the real benefits would be to enable this carbon fund, decarbonisation fund, to function properly. Sorry, have you understood what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. I think you're, and again, you're right to touch on Councillor earlier.
A load of farmers need to be prepared to give up land to plant trees on, for example, and that needs to be supported. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, and actually that presents a new challenge and potential that we may not just be looking at direct financial contributions, but other types of contributions to the fund, land being one. But anyway, that's a different discussion. Any other comments from members?
Is that your dog, Josh?
Apologies, yes, in the background. Sorry if you couldn't hear my comments, but unless there's any other comments from members, I will then, similarly to the earlier items, I've heard no comments to the contrary with regard to the supporting this report and the recommendations. So I will move that to the vote and ask that if anyone wishes to vote against, they use the raise hand function now. I have no indication, so again, that's unanimously supported. And thank you very much, the researchers, for your hard work on this and all of your contributions that have been invaluable. Thank you. Members, before I move on to the next agenda item, I'm mindful that we've nearly got to 1 o'clock and we are behind time, but for the benefit of, I'm sure, all members and officers, I think I intend to have a short comfort break. So people can stretch their legs or do whatever they need to in the next 8 minutes. And so we'll take a comfort break until 10 to 1, and where we'll reconvene the meeting, because I'm mindful we still have 3 items to get through. So if members want to turn their cameras off while they do, we have a short comfort break. I completely understand if you wish to do so. And perhaps Monica can pause the live feed. Thank you.
So Emily, nearly so close.
I was ready to go.